So I'm Julio Taylor. My job is creative director at Hallam. And to start, I'd like to first of all thank you all again for coming today and actually making a massive difference to an amazing cause, which is Framework. So actually, I'd just like to call for a quick round of applause again for Susan for organizing this entire event, actually. And like I said in the tweet earlier, actually, I think the biggest success of today is actually raising thousands, tens of thousands of pounds, actually, for an amazing cause. So I've attended quite a few of the talks today, and actually what I'm seeing is quite a thread, which is around complexity. It's about personalization, where it's about choosing goggles, it's about research, and it's about actually a really big combination of factors that add really to one thing, which is the experience of a customer. So I'd like to start with a question, actually. So how many of you guys here are in-house? So how many of you work, for example, for a big brand as in-house designers? Hands up. And how many of you are maybe marketing managers who work primarily with an agency, ideally Hallam? Okay, so those who haven't put your hands up at all, are you marketeers, freelancers? Hands up? Okay, so there's quite a big mix. So my first point is customers' expectations are higher than ever before. People every day at home are already using amazing products, whether it's BBC iPlayer, Netflix, Uber, YouTube. The person who is a decision maker as a B2B customer, for example, if you're in manufacturing, is also a consumer when they go home. And what's actually happening is that the expectations of your customer, regardless of what sector you're in, are being set outside of your control, both outside the control of your industry, but actually outside of the control of anything you can really do. So what does it mean for brands? So it means that brands need to work a lot harder to stay relevant. You need to focus on things like animation, video, personalization, user research, just to stay ahead of the demand. What it also means that it's putting design right at the core of marketing operations. And you can see from Rachel's talk earlier, from Speedo, for example, a project that I personally have been involved with, the amount of design complexity that's involved in solving a problem such as goggles is actually exponential. So the impact on this complexity on design teams is the result of hundreds of moving parts, like I said before, whether it's SEO, emerging technologies like search, AI, mobile, social, all these elements. It's putting quite a big demand on design teams, and it's leading to a huge amount of inconsistency, a lot of opinions, a lot of different designers doing different things, people trying to innovate, and it's creating a huge amount of overload on design teams that is becoming very difficult to manage. So brands need to get smarter about how they design, but they also need to work a lot closer with agencies and their in-house design teams to make sure that everybody's aligned around the common vision. So when I talk about complexity, an audit of a typical e-commerce website will look a lot like this. So if you were to screenshot every page of an e-commerce site, like for example my colleague Nick here did for Speedo once, you'll end up with something a bit like this: 5 different ways of adding to cart, 20 different ways of filtering for products. And what that does is it creates an increasingly disconnected experience. And what you're actually seeing here is the trail of different designers with different opinions, different ways of doing stuff. And what it does is it leads you into something which is fundamental to a modern experience. Actually, that's kind of ironic because my slide's kind of broken. But so what it's supposed to say is that a consistent presentation of your brand has a direct impact on your revenue. So there's research that shows that if you present your brand in a consistent way, and I'm going to show you some practical examples, not this one because it's broken, how that actually looks in practice, how big brands leveraging design systems which is the main topic of my talk today, to make sure that the way that they communicate their product is in a consistent and predictable and, most importantly, reusable format. So if you're presented with complexity, moving parts, inconsistency, broken slides, how do you fix that as a design team? So in my position as a creative designer at Hallam, I run a small but very good design team. How do we do this for our clients? And how do you do that yourself if you have your own design team? So do you design less? Like, do you throw every other design brief in the bin? No. Do you hire more designers? Well, you could, but you'll end up with more opinions and more inconsistency, more people to manage, more of an overhead. Do you design faster? Do you cut corners? Maybe. So what I'm proposing today is a way of designing smarter. A way of leveraging concepts that have actually been around in software development and marketing for a very long time, and leverage reusable components as a central part of scaling your brand for design. So a design system is first and foremost a collaboration framework for digital teams. It's a central, single source of truth around which marketing teams, product teams, designers, developers, high-level decision makers, clients even, can gather around and see what good looks like when you're creating an experience for your customers. And you might be thinking, well, that's what brand guidelines already do. They already tell me the size of a button or a font or a color. And yes, to some extent, a brand guideline should eliminate some of the opinion that leads to inconsistency. However, a design system actually goes beyond brand guidelines. Brand guidelines are part of a design system. And a design system incorporates all of the fundamental building blocks that make an experience that's true to your brand. So, as you can see from this diagram, your brand guidelines at the bottom here would be part of a design system. Photography styles, photography settings even, cropping standards for different formats of social media, video format, signage, audio, tone of voice, personality, accessibility, anything that could be considered a reusable building block for a brand needs to be part of a design system. So the idea of a design system is that you should be able to get to an acceptable representation of your brand with a fraction of the effort that you normally would spend. So theoretically, if you had 4 designers across different cities or different teams working on the same product, they should be able to congregate around the central source of truth that tells them what good looks like. So using a simple 80-20 rule, you should be able to get to 80% of a great experience that can actually match the expectations of your customer in only 20% of the time. And you should be able to spend all that extra time that you gain in crafting something exceptional. And exceptional is what you need to be aiming for, because that's the expectation that you can't control anymore. So, great brands own unique experiences. So, Starbucks is a good example. They have ownership of the color, the presentation of their logo on their cup, the way you get greeted when you walk into the store, the way that the specials are handwritten on the board, even the handwriting that they use, the language, it's all choreographed because every Starbucks in the world gives you the same experience. So why aren't we translating that to digital with the same precision that we do for stores? Or, if you want to take it a bit further, if we were going to create a new product, like the greatest milk ever designed, iMilk, by using only 3 or 4 simple fundamental parts of a brand's identity, you can create something that instantly feels like Apple. I'm not just talking about the logo, the exclusion around the logo, the use of a drop shadow, the black background, the pretentious headline that I was going to write, but then I thought it might be too much. It's about capturing the personality of your brand with only a few effortless, reusable touch points that are recognizable anywhere. And the same can be applied to digital. So I'll show you some practical examples of where this is being used today. So the first one is actually in your pockets, most of you right now. So how many of you got Android phones, for example? Or Google Maps on iOS? So you'll recognize this screenshot. This is Google Maps on the iOS device. So the most famous example of a design system that we use every single day is Google's material design. Material design was created by Google some years ago to try and bring a homogeneous and predictable user experience to the many, many products that they were launching on a daily basis. So whether you're using Google Search on your browser, or you're downloading Google Maps, or you're using any of the 100+ iOS apps that are on the store today, you will get pretty much the same experience. So for example, the way that the search box is positioned at the top, the way that buttons are laid out, the way that content is presented, iconography, microcopy, it's considered, it's predictable, and it's reusable. So it's a really great example of where Google have leveraged design systems, not necessarily because they want to protect the brand, but because they want to be able to scale quickly without having to worry about onboarding customers to a new experience. So if Google launched Google Jobs, for example, which is a recent thing, or Google whatever, you'll know how to use the app. The chances are within 3-4 minutes, if you use any Google product, you know how to use the app. You know how to sign in, you know how to save stuff, how to use the menus. And Google Material is so detailed that even the way a pop-up works, or the way that interacting with a Wi-Fi selector, the feedback that you get for touching a button, everything is prescribed. Everything is so detailed that there is very little room for error. What it also means is that Google are able to leverage a design system to allow a community of Android developers without the resources to design their own interfaces to quickly build apps for the ecosystem which they want to create. So it's a great example of design system being used for consistency at huge amounts of scale. Another example is a brand called Atlassian. So this is a company that make software called Jira, which is a software development product. It's a very good example of where a brand can be used to capture not just the way it looks, but also the personality of a brand. Another example here is Shopify Polaris design system. In this case here, I've highlighted the way that Shopify are putting accessibility at the core of what they consider to be an acceptable user experience. So if you want to deliver something for Shopify, it has to be accessible. Accessibility is not optional. It is a fundamental part of design. And this is probably my favorite. This is Hillary Clinton's ill-fated design system called Pantsuit, which was developed specifically to allow campaign teams to quickly launch fundraisers, local campaigns in a predictable and consistent way. So it's a toolkit of things like buttons, navigation, content, and it allowed distributed design teams from around the US to quickly scale the campaigns. So how do you go about creating a design system? So I'm not really going to talk about a step-by-step because it's a very long process, to be honest. But I want to give you some high-level takeaways that I think you should consider if you want to leverage the power of design systems in your brand. The first thing is you need to democratize the process. You need to include senior management, design teams, development teams, content, social, external agencies. The more you ask, the more you talk to people, the more you'll learn. The next thing is a design system is a product. It needs a budget, it needs an owner, it needs buy-in from senior management, and it needs a proper process. A design system should evolve constantly, not because it's broken, but because the trends and the demands on your brand also change. The Coca-Cola bottle changed over time, not because it was wrong or broken, but because the market changed. Or in the case of the 90s, plastic was no longer good. So some very quick takeaways. How consistent is your brand online? Have you thought about that? Have you audited? Talked to your teams? Talk to your marketing departments? Have a think. Second point, do you have a single source of truth? If you bring a new agency on board, do they know what good looks like without having to ask anyone, without having to have one-to-one relationships with designers? And the final point is if you rely on agencies, either for implementation or for everything, full service, are they aligned? Do you have a close relationship? Do you have a shared vision of what good looks like? And if you don't, then it's the time to consider not asking them to build it for you, but actually bring them on board and create a joint shared vision that allows you to have a consistent experience across all your platforms and can continue to develop over time. Thank you.